Ethan Miller lived a life that many would call modest, but to him it was simply survival. At 39, his small garage on the edge of a quiet Texas town was all he had. Dust clung to the corners, tools were second-hand, and the roof leaked when the rain came, but Ethan didn't complain. Every day he worked with his hands, fixing engines, patching up old trucks, and helping neighbors keep their cars alive a little longer. Business wasn't steady, and sometimes he went to bed hungry, yet he found pride in his work. What little he earned, he stretched carefully, but his heart was richer than his pockets. People in town respected him, not because of his wealth, he had none, but because of his character. Ethan never turned away anyone who needed help, whether they had money or not. If a farmer's tractor broke down during harvest, Ethan fixed it and said, "Pay me when you can." If a young mother's car wouldn't start, he lent her his only working battery until she could afford a new one. His generosity often left him with barely enough to cover his bills, yet he couldn't bring himself to change. Helping others made him feel alive, even when his own life seemed stagnant. The evenings were the hardest. When the garage door closed and the silence settled, Ethan sometimes wondered if this was all his life would ever be. He had no family, no wife, no children, just the hum of an old fridge and the sound of tools rattling in his worn toolbox. The loneliness weighed heavily, but he carried it quietly, never showing his struggles to the world. He poured himself into his work, believing that maybe one day, doing good for others would bring something good back to him. One evening, as the Texas sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gold, Ethan was locking up his garage. The day had been long and thankless, another customer promising to pay next week. Another repair that barely covered the cost of parts. He wiped the grease from his hands and sighed, ready to call it a night. That was when he noticed a car pulling up slowly to the curb, its headlights dim. The door opened and a woman emerged, not standing, but wheeling herself forward in a chair. Her name was Sarah Collins. 34 years old, with tired yet determined eyes, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the obvious weight of her circumstances. The wheelchair was worn, its wheels squeaking with each push. She maneuvered toward him and stopped, looking up at the faded sign above his garage. "Are you Ethan Miller?" she asked softly. He nodded, curious. "I heard you. Never say no to someone who needs help." Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the courage it took to be vulnerable with a stranger. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. He had fixed a lot of cars in his time, but this was different. Sarah explained that she wanted a car modified something she could drive without using her legs. The doctors had told her she might never walk again after an accident, but she refused to let her life be defined by what she couldn't do. The problem was, every place she'd gone before had quoted her prices so high she couldn't even dream of affording them. Then someone in town told her about Ethan, the mechanic with a kind heart, who sometimes helped people for far less than others would. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He had never done something like this before. Building a car with hand controls wasn't just a repair, it was an invention. He wasn't sure he had the skills or resources. But when he looked into Sarah's eyes, he didn't see defeat. He saw a fire burning there, a fierce will to live freely again. It was the same fire Ethan had long ago buried, beneath the weight of his own disappointments. Something about her determination touched him deeply. He rubbed the back of his neck and gave a small smile. "I've never built anything like that before," he admitted honestly. Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly, as though she expected rejection. But then Ethan added, "But that doesn't mean I can't try." Her face lit up instantly, a fragile spark of hope breaking through the shadows that had clearly followed her for a long time. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance, and sometimes a chance was all someone needed. That night, long after Sarah had left, Ethan stayed in the garage. He pulled out old notebooks, sketching designs under the dim glow of a hanging bulb. he thought. About the angles, the gears, the rods that could be transformed into hand controls. He scavenged through piles of spare parts, bolts and scraps he had saved over the years. His fingers were black with grease, his mind racing with ideas. It was the first time in years he felt excited about something bigger than a paycheck. To him, this wasn't just about building a machine. It was about building freedom for someone who had been denied it. The clock struck midnight, but Ethan didn't notice. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, and sparks flew as he tested different tools, experimenting with mechanisms that might work. He imagined Sarah, hands on the wheel, driving down the open road with the wind in her hair. That vision pushed him forward, giving him energy he thought he no longer had. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't just about Sarah's independence, it was also about his own redemption. Helping her might finally give his life a sense of meaning he had long been searching for. When Ethan finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and still. He looked up at the Texas sky, stars glittering like scattered diamonds. His body ached from exhaustion, but his heart felt strangely light. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about unpaid bills or empty cupboards. He was thinking about a woman who refused to give up, and how he might be the one to help her reclaim the freedom she deserved. The thought made him smile, even as grease stained his shirt and sweat clung to his brow. In the days that followed, Sarah returned to the garage, curious about his progress. Each time, Ethan showed her the sketches, the rough prototypes, and the pieces, slowly coming together. She listened, asked questions, and offered encouragement. Though he still worried about whether he could succeed, her belief in him never wavered. And as the two of them worked side by side in that dusty little garage, something invisible began to grow, something that went beyond mechanics and metal. It was trust. It was hope. And for both of them, it was the start of a journey neither had expected. For weeks, the garage became more than a place for grease and engines. It became a world of hope. Every morning, Ethan rose before dawn, his mind filled with new ideas. He scavenged through junkyards, bargained for second-hand parts, and even repurposed pieces from vehicles long abandoned. Sarah visited daily, rolling herself into the dusty space, her presence as constant as the smell of oil in the air. Together they turned an old sedan into something extraordinary, but it wasn't just metal that was being reshaped. It was two broken lives slowly being rebuilt, with every bolt tightened and every spark of welding fire. As Ethan worked, Sarah watched with quiet admiration. She would sit in her wheelchair near the workbench, sometimes holding tools for him, other times simply offering encouragement. What surprised Ethan most was how naturally they talked. He found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken aloud in years, about his late parents, about his loneliness, about his fear that his life had no greater purpose. In return, Sarah shared her own story, not with pity, but with a courage that humbled him. She spoke about the accident that had changed everything, the day her legs stopped working, and the nights she cried herself to sleep but refused to let despair consume her. Ethan learned that Sarah had once been a pianist, a woman who could pour her soul into music and make listeners feel emotions they didn't know they carried. The piano had been her language, her escape, her way of giving to the world. Losing her ability to use the pedals, and eventually her independence, felt like losing a part of her identity. Yet as she spoke, her eyes still carried light, a resilience that Ethan couldn't ignore. "Life doesn't always give us what we want," she said one evening, watching sparks fly as he welded, "but it always gives us a chance to choose what we do with what's left." Those words struck Ethan deeply. For years, he had lived believing his own dreams had passed him by, that his lot in life was simply to fix other people's cars until he grew too old to hold a wrench. But Sarah made him realize that even in brokenness, there was still power to give, to create, to change someone else's path. And so, day by day, his determination grew. He poured his soul into the project. Not for money, he refused every dollar Sarah offered, but because he wanted to see her live free again. In truth, the project gave him something too, a reason to wake up with purpose. The car itself was nothing special to look at. From the outside, an aging sedan that had seen better days. But under Ethan's hands, it transformed. He stripped the interior, rebuilt the steering system, and designed a set of custom hand controls using scrap metal, gears, and rods. Each piece was carefully measured, adjusted, and tested, often more than once. Some nights when Sarah had already gone home, Ethan stayed behind, working until his eyes burned with fatigue. Failure wasn't an option. He imagined her hands gripping the wheel, imagined her laughing as she drove down an open road. That vision carried him through every obstacle. In the quiet moments, when the machines rested and the garage grew still, Sarah and Ethan found companionship in their conversations. She teased him for his stubbornness. He admired her unshakable faith. They shared coffee in paper cups, old stories from their childhoods, even silence that somehow felt comfortable rather than empty. Slowly, without either of them noticing at first, a bond formed. It wasn't romantic yet. Not exactly. It was something gentler, rooted in respect, trust, and the strange comfort of two souls finding in each other what they had lost in themselves. For Ethan, it felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. The townspeople noticed the change in Ethan, too. The mechanic, who once kept to himself, now seemed lighter, more alive. His garage no longer looked like a forgotten shed, but like a place where miracles were being quietly built. Neighbors stopped by out of curiosity, whispering about the project car and the woman in the wheelchair who came every day. Ethan didn't care about the whispers. For the first time, he wasn't trying to prove himself to anyone. He just wanted to finish what he started and see Sarah drive again, see her reclaim something the world had unfairly taken from her. Weeks turned into a month, and the car neared completion. Ethan fine-tuned the controls, adjusting the resistance so Sarah could accelerate and brake smoothly with her hands. He reinforced the frame to make sure it was safe, rewired parts of the system, and checked everything twice. Sarah's excitement grew with each passing day. She often closed her eyes, imagining herself driving, feeling the road beneath her, not through her feet, but through the freedom of motion. "I can almost hear the wind," she said once, smiling. Ethan, wiping sweat from his brow, felt something stir in his chest at her words, a joy he hadn't known he was capable of. Then at last the day arrived. The sun shone brightly, casting golden rays across the garage floor. Ethan stood back, his heart pounding as Sarah wheeled herself toward the car. He had polished the sedan until it gleamed, the hand controls shining like a promise. "It's ready," he said softly, his voice carrying both pride and nervousness. Sarah looked at the car for a long moment, her eyes glistening. Then, with Ethan's help, she transferred from her wheelchair into the driver's seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the custom handles. For a heartbeat, the garage was silent, as though holding its breath. "Go on," Ethan encouraged gently. Sarah took a deep breath, pushed the control forward, and the car rolled ahead, slowly at first, carefully but steadily. Then she pressed the brake, turned the wheel, and the sedan responded perfectly. With each movement, her confidence grew. She maneuvered the car around the garage lot, laughter spilling from her lips, echoing off the metal walls. It wasn't just laughter, it was freedom, it was triumph, it was life. Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he watched, his chest swelling with a joy he had never known. In that moment, every struggle, every sacrifice felt worth it. When Sarah finally parked and turned off the engine, she sat there for a long moment, hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. "I drove," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "For the first time in years, I drove." Ethan nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. For her, it was a victory over fate. For him, it was the realization that his hands, which had spent years repairing broken machines, had finally repaired something far more precious, a spirit. And in the joy shining on Sarah's face, Ethan found something he hadn't dared to hope for. A glimpse of the life he himself might still have. That evening was different. The air felt strange, charged, as Ethan stood, wiping grease from his hands, expecting Sarah to roll in like she always did. But when he heard the soft thud of footsteps instead of the familiar squeak of wheels, his heart skipped. He turned, and there she was, framed in the doorway, standing. Shaky, leaning on crutches, but standing. For a moment Ethan thought he was imagining it. His tools slipped from his hands and clattered against the concrete floor. Sarah's smile was trembling but radiant, the kind that carried both victory and vulnerability. Surprise, she whispered, her voice breaking as tears gathered in her eyes. Ethan couldn't move, his chest tightening as if the world itself had stopped. All those months of watching her laugh from her chair, all the hours he had spent building her car, all the conversations about courage and therapy, and now she was standing before him. He rushed forward, instinctively wanting to catch her if she fell, but she steadied herself. Slowly, she took another step, then another, her crutches clicking against the floor like the sound of a miracle. "How?" was all Ethan could manage to say, his voice shaking. Sarah's eyes softened. "I never told you everything, Ethan. I've been in therapy for months, pushing myself every day, but I lost faith until you gave it back." Her words struck him deeper than any blow could. All along he had thought he was the one giving, that he was sacrificing for her. But in truth she had been giving him something, reminding him what it meant to believe. His throat ached as he tried to hold back tears, but they came anyway. For a long moment they stood there in the dim light of the garage, no sound but the quiet hum of a cooling engine. It wasn't just about walking, it was about trust, about the unseen bond that had been forged between them through sweat, persistence, and hope. Ethan realized with a pang of awe that they had both been saving each other. When Sarah finally spoke again, her words carried yet another revelation. "Ethan," she said gently, "there's something else I haven't told you." He frowned, confused. She hesitated, then drew in a deep breath, her crutches steady beneath her arms. "I'm not just Sarah Collins, the woman you think you met by chance. I'm Sarah Collins, daughter of William Collins." Ethan's brow furrowed. The name was familiar, too familiar. William Collins, the wealthy philanthropist, the man who had built schools, hospitals, and community centers across America. A man who seemed untouchable in his world of influence and power. Ethan's jaw dropped. "You mean—" His voice trailed off as the weight of it sank in. She nodded. "Yes. I didn't tell you, because I wanted to know who would help me without expecting money, without seeing my last name before my face." The revelation hit Ethan like a storm. All this time, he thought he was helping a stranger, just another soul who needed a hand. But she wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country. For a brief, terrifying moment he wondered if he had been foolish, if everything between them was suddenly tainted by wealth and worlds he didn't belong to. Yet when Sarah's eyes met his, he saw no pretense, no games, only the same woman who had sat in his garage holding tools, who had laughed at his clumsy jokes, who had taught him that kindness mattered more than circumstance. "You believed in me," she whispered. "That's all I ever needed." Later that week, Sarah brought her father to the garage. William Collins was a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and a commanding presence. Ethan had seen his face in newspapers, on television, but seeing him walk into his dusty little garage felt surreal. Ethan stood, awkwardly, wiping his hands on his rag, feeling suddenly small. But William extended his hand firmly. "My daughter tells me you changed her life," he said. His voice was calm but carried the weight of truth. Ethan shook his hand, humbled. "I just did what I could, sir," William studied. him for a moment, then smiled faintly. Sometimes what we can do is enough to change the world. The conversation that followed changed Ethan's life forever. Sarah explained how Ethan had built not just a car, but a future, how his ingenuity, his compassion, and his refusal to give up had given her independence again. William listened intently, his expression softening, as he looked around the garage, as if seeing the potential within its grease-stained walls. Finally, William turned to Ethan. "I want to offer you something," he said, "a chance to lead a foundation, together with Sarah, that will build adaptive vehicles for people with disabilities across America. You've proven that heart matters more than money, and I trust no one more than you to carry this forward." Ethan was speechless. Just days ago, he had been a poor mechanic, scraping by, wondering if life had passed him by. Now, here he was, being asked to lead, something that could touch thousands of lives. His throat tightened. "Why me?" he asked quietly. William's answer was simple. "Because you didn't see my daughter as a project or a burden. You saw her as a person. And because you did something the world's richest companies haven't managed, you gave her freedom." Ethan turned to Sarah, her eyes shining with quiet pride. In that moment, he knew it wasn't about money or recognition. It was about purpose. From that day forward, Ethan's dusty garage transformed into something else entirely. With funding from the Collins family and the guidance of engineers and therapists, it became a hub of innovation, a place where ordinary mechanics and dreamers worked side by side to create vehicles that gave freedom to people who had lost it. But at its heart, the spirit of the garage remained unchanged, the same determination, the same late nights, the same belief that no challenge was too great. Ethan often walked the aisle, still covered in grease, still using his bare hands, but now with a sense of pride he had never known. Each vehicle that rolled out of those doors carried more than parts, it carried hope. The story spread quickly. Newspapers picked it up, then television networks. Soon, America knew the tale of a poor mechanic and a woman in a wheelchair, who believed in each other until miracles happened. Letters poured in, parents asking for help, veterans hoping for a chance to drive again, children dreaming of independence. Each story fueled Ethan's fire. He worked harder, but unlike before, he was never alone. Sarah stood beside him every step of the way, not just as a beneficiary, but as a partner, her crutches clicking through the halls of the new foundation building as she spoke with families, shared her own journey, and reminded everyone that disability did not mean the end of life. And through it all, something deeper blossomed between Ethan and Sarah. At first it was friendship, then trust, then something unspoken but undeniable. He had given her freedom, and she had given him purpose. They laughed together, fought through challenges together, and dreamed together. On quiet nights, when the work was done and the world had gone silent, they would sit outside the garage, watching the stars. Sarah would play piano again, soft melodies on a keyboard she had set up in the office, and Ethan would listen, closing his eyes, feeling her music mend. Parts of him he didn't even know were broken. Love didn't need to be rushed. It was already there, in every act of kindness, every shared victory. For the first time in his life, Ethan Miller, the poor mechanic who once thought he had nothing, found himself with everything that truly mattered, a purpose bigger than himself, a woman who believed in him as much as he believed in her, a future not defined by poverty or struggle, but by giving hope to others. The dusty garage where it all began would forever remain a symbol not of hardship, but of miracles, born from kindness. And in the end, Ethan finally understood the greatest wealth was never measured in money, but in lives, changed by love, compassion, and the courage to believe in the impossible.